My name is Noah Bennett. I was the best man at my brother's wedding until I found out minutes before the ceremony that he had slept with my fiancée. I didn't punch him. I didn't scream. I walked on stage and showed the truth. Every photo, every text, every dollar he laundered. By the time the candles caught fire, the room had already burned. I didn't ruin the wedding. I ended the lie. I'm the host of this story. And this is how silence became justice. The tie felt too tight around my neck, even though I had adjusted it 3 times already. I stood in the groom's suite on the 22nd floor of the Whitmore Hotel, a polished beast of a place tucked into Brooklyn Heights. Outside the floor-length windows, the East River shimmered under the morning sun, but inside, my stomach twisted like I'd swallowed a bag of nails. Today was my younger brother Liam's wedding day. I was his best man. And somewhere in the ballroom below, Chloe, my ex-fiancée, was about to become his wife. I checked my watch again. The ceremony was scheduled for 11. It was 10:35. My palms were sweating. You'd think I'd be used to being overlooked. My entire childhood had prepared me for this moment. Liam had always been the golden boy. While I scraped through scholarships, took night jobs, and bootstrapped a startup in a tiny co-working space, Liam cruised through business school on our mother's blind praise and our father's silent approval. He was handsome in a glossy magazine kind of way. That sharp jawline, slicked back hair, perfect suit measurements. Meanwhile, I had always been more functional. Even now, my tux felt like it belonged to someone else. I heard footsteps echo in the marble corridor. Mason poked his head in, tall and solid as ever in his dark blue suit. "She's here," he said. My mouth went dry. I didn't need to ask who. Mason gave me a look somewhere between pity and caution. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. "Sure. Why wouldn't I be?" He stepped fully into the room and shut the door. "Look, Noah, I didn't want to bring this up today, but Erin's here. She came in with the afternoon train. I saw her downstairs." "Erin." My brain tripped over the name. My mind was already too full. I hadn't seen her since the breakup, since I chose Chloe over her, thinking I was chasing something better. Cleaner. Simpler. "Right. Thanks," I said, clearing my throat. Mason glanced toward the hallway. "You sure you want to go through with all this?" I gave a thin smile. Not my call anymore. I'm just here to hold the damn ring. He gave me a nod and disappeared. I stood there a moment longer, then turned to the mirror. My reflection looked like a stranger dressed up for someone else's story. 10 minutes later, I walked down the staircase into the main ballroom, the sound of music and chatter rising like steam. The room was a dream. White roses cascaded from tall glass vases. Gold-trimmed chairs stood in perfect rows, and the string quartet played something soft and pretentious. Then I saw her, Chloe. She stepped into the ballroom hand in hand with Liam. Her dress wasn't white, it was blush pink, soft and strategic, the kind of color meant to whisper innocence while screaming power. She looked stunning, of course. She always did. But the moment our eyes met, everything slowed. Her grip on Liam's hand tightened and she looked away. Liam, however, met my gaze straight on. Not a flicker of guilt, not a blink, just a polite nod like we were distant cousins seeing each other at a funeral. I clenched my jaw and looked past them. My mother, Susan, was already seated near the front row, surrounded by her friends in tailored pastel suits and decades of layered judgment. Dad Henry sat stiff beside her, hands folded in his lap like a man enduring a dental procedure. I took my place near the altar, gripping the ring box tighter than I meant to. They moved closer. I could hear Chloe laughing at something Liam whispered. Her laugh hadn't changed. It still sounded like wind chimes dipped in honey and rehearsed for attention. My stomach churned. The officiant gave me a nod. I nodded back. The ceremony hadn't even begun, but I already felt the walls closing in. Somewhere in this room, Erin was watching, and somewhere inside me, something old and buried was clawing to the surface. And the fire hadn't even started yet. It used to be Chloe and I walking into rooms like this, fingers laced tightly, her whispering jokes into my ear as everyone turned their heads to look. She had a quiet magnetism back then, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but received it anyway. She was introspective, thoughtful, the kind of woman who'd sit with you in silence and make it feel like a symphony. We met at a tech conference in Chicago, both stuck in a panel about AI in education. She rolled her eyes when the speaker dropped yet another buzzword, and I stifled a laugh. Afterward, we got coffee, then drinks, then we were inseparable. For 2 years, she stood by me as I built Nova Learning from the ground up. She helped me design our first logo, proofread pitches, cook dinner when I passed out at the desk. I thought she believed in the mission in me. Maybe she did once. But something changed during year 2. As Nova gained traction, I began pulling 14-hour days, investor meetings, product testing, hiring, scaling. She stopped coming to the office, stopped asking how things were going. At first, I thought she was just tired. Then I thought she was giving me space. Turns out she was slipping away. Family events became awkward. Liam had always been charming in a way I wasn't. The kind of guy who made everyone feel like the only person in the room. I watched Chloe laugh at his jokes, place a hand on his shoulder when he talked. It never struck me as inappropriate. They were close. We were all close. One night at our parents' house in Montauk, I caught a look between them. It lasted less than a second, but it was electric, like a secret passed silently across the dinner table. I chalked it up to imagination, paranoia. I kissed her goodnight that evening, and she pulled away a second too soon. After that, the distance became a canyon. We still slept in the same bed, but it felt like there was a mile of cold sheets between us. I asked her if everything was okay. She said she was just tired. Work was stressful. Her mother was ill. She wasn't sleeping well. I believed her, because I wanted to. Then one morning she was gone. No note, no text, nothing. She moved out while I was at a meeting. Mason was the one who told me she'd called Liam for help moving her stuff. I hadn't seen her since, until today. And now she was wearing blush pink and smiling up at my brother like he had rescued her from a burning building. I clenched my jaw, fighting the sour taste rising in my throat. The quartet switched to a different piece. My cue was coming. Chloe laughed at something Liam said, her hand resting on his forearm. Her laugh, once mine, now echoed across the ballroom light and practiced. Behind me, the guests were settling in. Cameras clicked. A few women dabbed their eyes with tissues. I could hear the rustle of expensive fabric and the soft buzz of anticipation. And all I could think about was how I let her go without asking why. How I watched her slip through my fingers and into the arms of the person who had been handed everything his whole life. Liam got the praise, the attention, the best schools, the easy road, and now he had Chloe too. The officiant gestured to me. It was time. I walked forward, standing next to Liam, feeling the heat of their presence beside me. And still I said nothing. Liam always had a way of walking into a room like he owned the air in it. Even now, as he stood beside me at the altar, his posture was relaxed, his grin photogenic, his confidence untouched by guilt or shame. He wore our mother's approval like cologne, and it filled every damn space. Growing up, I was the one who got the report cards that said, "tries hard," while his came home with "gifted" scribbled in red ink. I stayed up late learning to code on a second-hand laptop while Liam got tutors and private SAT prep. At our family dinners, he'd charm the aunts, play chess with our dad, and somehow end up the center of every story. I was just the one who cleared the dishes. It didn't bother me at first. I thought that was just how siblings worked. But somewhere along the way, admiration turned into competition and competition into erasure. One night, about a year before Chloe left, we were all gathered at my parents' house for my mother's birthday. She loved things like that: perfect table settings, candles, catered food, pretending to be homemade. Chloe sat beside me, visibly tense. I hadn't realized then, but she'd already begun pulling away. The conversation turned to work, as it often did. I shared that Nova Learning had just landed its first six-figure education contract with a charter school network in Pennsylvania. That's when Liam leaned back in his chair, sipped his wine, and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "So basically, you're just digitizing lesson plans teachers already don't want to use." The room laughed, not because it was funny, but because Liam had said it. I looked at Chloe. She gave a soft smile and glanced down at her plate. Dad didn't say anything. He just kept chewing his steak, eyes low. "But Mom?" Mom leaned forward and added, "Well, honey, Liam just wants what's best for you. Maybe this little project will give you some experience for something real later." Something real. My throat had gone dry. I wanted to leave, flip the table, yell, but I didn't. I forced a smile and said, "Actually, it's been growing fast. We're hiring 3 new developers this month." Liam gave a slow clap. "That's adorable. Maybe next year you'll even break even." More laughter. That was the night I realized they didn't see me. Not really. They saw effort, struggle, a try hard. Liam was the winner, the success, the face of the family. As we cleared dessert, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. She touched my arm and said gently, "You know your place, right, Noah? You've always been the one who works hard, and that's valuable in its own way." My place. I nodded and left early. I didn't tell Chloe about that moment, or maybe I did and she just forgot. She'd already started turning toward Liam by then, her smiles warmer for him, her laughs longer. Back in the present, standing at the altar, the officiant began his welcome speech. Guests settled. My fingers tightened around the ring buck. Liam glanced at me, that same damn smile on his face, as if none of it ever happened. As if he hadn't taken everything that was ever mine and called it fate. Mason was never one to meddle. He played peacekeeper in every argument growing up, the guy who diffused tension with sarcasm or a well-timed drink refill. He had been Liam's best friend since grade school and mine since high school. Somehow he'd walked the tightrope of being close to both of us without ever taking sides. But lately, even Mason couldn't pretend not to notice something was off. He caught up with me outside the ballroom after the ceremony ended. The guests had migrated to the cocktail area, and I had stepped out to catch my breath. He leaned against the railing, eyes scanning the crowd below. "You okay?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, just watched the way Chloe clung to Liam's arm like she had never belonged anywhere else. "She looks happy," I said flatly. Mason nodded slowly. "Yeah, too happy." That caught my attention. "What does that mean?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I wasn't going to say anything. I mean, it's their wedding day, but I think you should know something. I found out a few months ago that they were seeing each other long before you two broke up." My stomach dropped. Cold air rushed into my lungs. "What?" He looked at me, honest and grim. "I saw them. Twice. Once at that wine bar near Lafayette. Then again at that cabin trip in Vermont. You remember when you couldn't make it because of that pitch meeting? They went anyway. My throat was dry. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to blow up your family. I figured maybe it ended. Maybe it didn't mean what it looked like. And honestly, I thought you'd hate me for even suggesting it." I looked away. My jaw clenched so tight it ached. That wasn't all. There's something else, Mason said. He pulled out his phone and handed it to me. On the screen were bank screenshots, transactions from a holding company registered under Liam's name. The amounts were massive and frequent. What am I looking at? He kept his voice low. I cross-checked with some public filings. That company, it's been moving money through shell vendors tied to real estate in Nevada and crypto exchanges overseas. It doesn't add up. No one makes that kind of volume from consulting. I stared at the numbers. My mind spun. You think he's laundering money? Mason nodded once. I've been quietly looking into it. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. But now that you're in this deep, I thought you should know. Liam's not just shady with Chloe. Something bigger's going on. I handed him back the phone. Why now? Because Mason said you're the only one who's not blind to him. And I think you're gonna need leverage. The door to the ballroom creaked open. Chloe peeked her head out, then called sweetly, Noah. They're doing family photos. I forced a smile. Be right there. She vanished again. Mason looked at me one last time. Whatever you decide to do it smart. The man's built a fortress out of charm. You're gonna need more than fire to burn it down. He walked away, leaving me standing there, the weight of betrayal now balanced with suspicion. Something inside me began to shift. This wasn't just about love anymore, it was about truth. And I had just seen my first crack in his perfect glass castle. I didn't sleep. I sat in my hotel room with the curtains drawn, the dim city lights filtering in like ghosts. The letter from my mother sat folded in my coat pocket, but it wasn't the only weight pressing on my chest. At 7:30, my phone buzzed. Mason, we need to talk, now. I met him at a diner a few blocks from the hotel. It was still early, barely any customers. Mason slid into the booth across from me, looking like he hadn't slept either. He pulled a manila folder from his coat and placed it on the table between us. What is that? I asked. Proof. He opened it slowly, revealing a stack of printed screenshots and photos. Messages between Chloe and Liam. Flirty at first, then progressively more intimate. Plans, jokes, memories they should not have shared. Pictures from the Vermont cabin trip, one of them holding hands under the table. Another outside at night, their faces too close for family. I stared at them, my hands trembling. How long have you had these? I whispered. A while. I didn't want to believe it at first, but then I started digging. There's more. He pulled out another set of documents. Bank transfers, shell company filings, offshore holdings. All linked back to Liam. The money trail was clear and damning. I leaned back, the booth's vinyl pressing into my spine. My brother, my fiancée, my mother. My voice cracked. Everyone lied to me. Mason said nothing. He just waited. I stood up, pacing between tables. I wanted to hit something, break something. I saw Liam's smug face in my mind, heard Chloe's laugh. Felt my mother's words burn all over again. A storm roared in my chest. I'm going to kill him, I muttered. Mason stood too. No, you're not. That's what he'd expect. That's what he wants. You explode, you look unstable. He keeps the empire, the girl, the story. I stopped breathing hard. Then what? Let him walk into his own collapse. You've got the evidence. We build the cracks, we let it crumble. I dropped back into the booth. I wanted revenge, but not messy revenge, not something that could be washed away. I wanted the kind that left stains. I pocketed the folder. Let's start with this. Mason nodded. I'll cover you, but we have to be smart. We left the diner in silence. Outside, the sky had shifted, heavy with clouds, like it knew something was coming. And it was. So was I. The morning of the wedding was eerily calm. The air outside was crisp with sunlight cutting clean across the rooftop garden of the venue. Staff hustled between flower arrangements and final table settings. Everyone moved like nothing was wrong, like this was just another beautiful Brooklyn wedding. Inside, Chloe paced the bridal suite in her gown, tugging at her bracelet and glancing at her reflection every 5 seconds. Her bridesmaids whispered around her, touching up makeup, adjusting veils, pretending not to notice how pale she looked. Her eyes kept darting to her phone like she was expecting someone or something to intervene. Liam, on the other hand, was laughing with the groomsmen, sipping champagne like he hadn't built his future on lies. His suit was tailored, his speech rehearsed. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. When he looked in the mirror, I wondered if he saw anything at all beneath that polished surface. I arrived in Suns. No fanfare, no greetings. Just walked through the staff entrance with a black duffel bag and a calm so deep it felt like armor. I wore the suit Liam picked for me months ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. The ceremony moved quickly, too quickly. Vows were exchanged. Chloe's voice trembled. Liam held her hand a little too tight. Tears were shed. Applause rang through the hall. I stood to the side, hands clasped in front of me. Expression unreadable. Then came the reception. The ballroom buzzed with music, laughter, silverware against porcelain. People danced. Toasts were made. Champagne flowed. I watched it all from my table, waiting. When it was time for the best man's speech, all eyes turned to me. I walked to the stage slowly, the wireless remote already in my hand. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. I looked at the crowd, all the smiles and expectations. "Thank you all for being here," I began. "I'm honored to speak today, but before I do, I've prepared something a little different." Behind me, the projector screen descended. The lights dimmed slightly, and I clicked. The first slide appeared a photo of Liam and Chloe holding hands in Vermont, time-stamped 6 months before Chloe moved out. A few people gasped. Click. Text messages, flirtatious, then explicit. The room began to shift. Click. Wire transfer receipts, offshore accounts, company names tied to Liam. Click. Chloe and Liam outside the jazz bar, her hand on his chest, their smiles intimate, unmistakable. Murmurs erupted across the ballroom. Susan dropped her glass. My father's face was blank, unreadable. Chloe stood frozen, her face drained of color. Liam stepped forward, hand raised as if he could stop the images with his palm. "Noah, stop this," he barked. I kept clicking. "Everything you see here," I said calmly, "is real. Verified. Backed up. But I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here for truth." The screen went black. Chloe stumbled forward, knocking into a table. A candelabra tipped. Flames caught on a napkin, then spread to the tablecloth. Someone screamed. Guests jumped back. A groomsman grabbed a fire extinguisher. Foam sprayed. Smoke drifted. I stepped back from the podium, letting the chaos unfold. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight. I had already burned it down. And this time everyone saw the fire. Then came the silence, the kind that only follows the truth. Mason stood near the exit, arms crossed, eyes on Liam. Erin was beside me now. She didn't say anything, just slipped her hand into mine, and I stood there letting the last of it fall. Liam didn't say a word. He turned, shoving past his best man, and stormed down the hallway, yanking at his tie like it was choking him. Chloe collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably, her perfectly done makeup running down her cheeks in black rivers. Susan fainted, literally dropped right there between the cake table and the string quartet. My father moved faster than I'd seen in years. Catching her before she hit the floor, he looked up at me with eyes that didn't hold judgment, only exhaustion. I walked away from the stage slowly, each step deliberate. The chaos buzzed around me but never touched me. I felt weightless, hollow, free. Every eye in the room burned against my back, but no one stopped me. No one dared. Henry stood up with a glass in hand and tapped a spoon against it. The room silenced as best it could. He cleared his throat, voice shaky but steady enough. On behalf of my family, he said, I apologize to every guest here. We had no knowledge of what was happening behind the scenes. We will address this properly. He bowed his head. Susan groaned from his arms. Two guests helped carry her to a nearby chair. She came to slowly blinking as if waking from a dream. The servers scrambled to regain control of the room. Burned linens were whisked away. The DJ turned off the music. A few brave guests tried to resume quiet conversation over untouched plates. Others rushed out whispering, calling their rides. The scent of smoke still lingered. Erin found me standing near the bar where no one dared approach. You okay? She asked again, softer this time. I gave her a nod, but it was empty. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad, just still. We walked outside away from the noise. The sun had started to dip, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I could feel the weight of every eye that had seen the slideshow, every phone that had recorded it. She squeezed my arm. They needed to see it, Noah. You didn't just blow up a wedding, you exposed rot. I nodded. I knew she was right, but it still felt like standing in the ashes of something I once loved. My phone buzzed. Mason, you need to come back, someone's here. Back inside the room was eerily quiet. A man in a charcoal suit stood beside Liam, who looked like he was about to be sick. The man's badge caught the chandelier light. Detective Clark, he introduced himself, extending a hand. Mr. Bennett, I'd like to have a conversation with your brother regarding several financial irregularities involving Apex Financial and the offshore accounts associated with his name. Liam's jaw slackened. He looked at me, eyes filled with panic and betrayal. You did this, he whispered. No, I said, my voice calm. You did this. I just stopped hiding it. Clark placed a gentle hand on Liam's shoulder. We're not arresting him yet, just a conversation, but I'd appreciate your cooperation. Liam didn't resist. He turned, shoulders slumped, and followed Clark out of the ballroom, each step heavier than the last. The silence they left behind was deafening. Guests began whispering again, theories spiraling. Mason stood by the bar, arms folded, eyes sharp. I joined him. It's happening faster than we thought, he said. The financial stuff. It's bigger than we expected. I stared at the door Liam had walked through. Let them follow the trail. Let them find everything. I'm done being quiet. Erin joined us, handing me a glass of water. Her presence was steady grounding. You think they'll indict? She asked. They will if Clark's half as good as he seems, Mason replied. I looked around at the ruin of what had once been my brother's perfect wedding, what had once been my family. This isn't the end, Erin said. No, I agreed, my voice low. It's just the beginning. And together we stepped out of the wreckage into whatever came next. The morning after the wedding felt like waking up after a storm had passed, not quite calm, but eerily quiet. I drove to the Nova Learning office just after sunrise, the streets still empty, the city not yet awake. The parking lot was quiet. No interns with coffee runs, no developers pacing with Bluetooth headsets. Just silence. I walked through the glass doors and rode the elevator alone. On the way up, I looked at my reflection. I didn't look like the man who'd started this company 5 years ago. That version of me had hope in his eyes. Maybe even naivety. This version was stripped down raw, ready to let go. My office was exactly how I'd left it 2 days ago. Laptop still open, whiteboard full of planning notes. I picked up a framed photo on my desk, one of Chloe and me at a tech gala 2 years ago. We were smiling. I set it face down. One by one, I packed things into a cardboard box. Notebooks, a few books, a lucky mug I never used. The whole time, no one walked in. No one interrupted. It was like the universe understood I needed this moment alone. As I placed the last item in the box, I paused, running my fingers over the worn surface of a leather-bound journal I'd kept since the early days of Nova. Pages filled with ambition, goals, and quotes that once drove me. I closed it gently. An hour later, I left my badge on the desk, left the box at the front desk with a note for the co-founder, and walked out without looking back. Nova Learning would survive without me. It was time to start over. Not as the man who'd tried to build a legacy for someone else's approval, but as someone who finally chose himself. I didn't drive home. Instead, I found myself at my father's house in Queens. I hadn't called ahead. I wasn't sure he'd be there. But when I knocked, he opened the door almost immediately, like he'd been expecting it. The old wooden door creaked the same way it had when I was a boy. We sat on the porch, the late morning sea casting shadows across the wood. He poured 2 glasses of iced tea and didn't say a word for a long time. Then finally, you did what I never could. I looked at him. He wasn't angry, he wasn't ashamed. He looked tired, yes, but something else too, lighter. "You knew?" I asked. He nodded. "I suspected early on. Your mother changed after Liam was born. I found letters once. Then the timelines didn't add up. But by then it was too late. We were in too deep, and I was too sick to fight." My chest tightened. "Why didn't you say anything?" He looked out across the street. "Because I thought protecting the family's image was more important than truth. I thought I could fix it quietly, but it just festered." We sat in silence. 2 men bound by a name that had lost meaning. "I'm stepping away from Nova," I said. He turned to me, surprised but not shocked. "Good. That place ate too much of you. Build something else. Something just yours." The wind picked up slightly. A leaf skittered across the porch. He reached down slowly, picked it up, then let it go again. Watching it drift reminded me of how easily things could fall apart when left unchecked. "And Liam?" I asked. "He'll face what he built. I'll cooperate with the investigation if they come to me. But I'm done covering for anyone." It was the first time he'd spoken with that much clarity in years. I believed him. Not because I needed to, but because the weight in his voice had lifted. Like confession had given him back some part of himself. I stood up and shook his hand. Then without thinking, I pulled him into a hug. He stiffened for a second, then hugged back. I could feel the years of silence between us dissolve, wordless but loud in its meaning. "Be better than me," he said. "I'm trying," I whispered. As I walked back to my car, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief exactly, but release. The weight wasn't gone, but I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I watched the house fade in the rearview mirror as I drove away, the morning sun now bright and clear. And that was enough for now. It had been a week since the wedding. I'd avoided the news as much as possible, though I knew Liam's story was spreading. The media didn't miss a scandal involving fraud and betrayal. Nova Learning had issued a statement. Chloe had gone silent. Mason told me the FBI had been in contact with him for documentation. Liam hadn't been arrested yet, but it was only a matter of time. One afternoon, I walked into a quiet coffee shop on West 49th, a place I used to visit when I first moved to the city. The smell of ground beans and old wood hit me instantly, and I almost turned around, but something held me there. Then I saw her. Erin was sitting near the back, a book in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. She hadn't changed much, her hair a little shorter, eyes just as sharp. She looked up, surprised but not startled. "Noah," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. She smiled and nodded to the seat across from her. We didn't rush into conversation. We sat for a few minutes in silence, watching the city pass outside the fogged glass. "You look lighter," she finally said. "I feel lighter," I replied. We talked for a long time, about the past, about Chloe, about the mess of the wedding. She didn't flinch when I told her everything. She only reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "You deserve better," she said. I didn't ask what this was. We weren't suddenly back together, but we were present. That was enough. She told me about a time right after we broke up when she moved to Portland just to feel far away from everything. She said she used to take long walks along the river and talk to herself, trying to make sense of the silence I'd left behind. That hit me hard. I apologized again, and this time it felt like the words had weight. Later that week, I received an email from NYU. They were looking for a guest lecturer for their business ethics course. Mason, it turned out, had recommended me. I hesitated before replying, then typed 2 words, "I'm in." Teaching wasn't something I had considered before, but maybe sharing the worst chapter of my life could help someone else avoid writing theirs. I dug through my old journals and presentation decks, crafting lectures around trust, betrayal, and rebuilding things. No textbook could teach as well as life had taught me. On my first day at NYU, I stood in front of 30 students, palms sweating, heart racing. I told them about accountability, but I started by admitting the worst thing I'd ever done, abandoning the person who had loved me most. A student in the back asked how you know when it's too late to make things right. I didn't have a perfect answer, but I told them it starts with showing up even when it's hard. Each day grew a little easier. I jogged along the Hudson, cooked again, called my dad just to talk. We didn't say much, but even a short call felt like progress. I checked in with Mason, who was piecing together Liam's financial records now with the help of legal counsel. He seemed energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. One evening he called me in a rush. He said someone had followed him from the courthouse, a dark SUV that didn't belong in his quiet neighborhood. He brushed it off, but I could hear the tension. We agreed to be cautious. The next morning, the New York Times ran a headline, "Local tech star under federal investigation." Liam's face was front and center. Chloe's name was buried in the article, her reputation imploding quietly. I didn't feel triumphant, just finished. But also strangely grateful. It meant I didn't have to tell the story. The truth was out. Erin and I met for coffee again. No labels, no expectations. Just 2 people who had once been broken by me, now sitting across from each other, quietly healing. She brought her camera this time, told me she'd taken up freelance photography. She snapped a photo of me mid-sentence and laughed. "You always looked like you were solving some invisible puzzle," she said. "Maybe I finally am," I replied. Later that day, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my father. Inside were just a few lines. "If I had been stronger, I would have spoken up. I'm sorry I wasn't, but I'm proud of who you are now. Dad." I sat with that letter for a long time. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift inside, like I had finally been seen. I also received an unexpected package at my apartment one evening. It was from an old investor in Nova who had seen the news and reached out. Inside was a letter offering mentorship and seed funding if I ever wanted to start again. Not because of pity, but because he believed in redemption. I folded the letter and tucked it away. I started writing more. At first in a private document, then slowly publishing essays on business ethics, second chances, and accountability. The response was more than I expected. One reader, a former CEO, wrote to say my story saved him from taking a path he'd regret. That night I walked home through Central Park, wind crisp against my face. The streetlights lit a quiet path and I let my feet decide where to go. I wasn't who I'd been before any of this began. I wasn't yet who I was becoming, but I was getting closer. The investigation accelerated quickly after the news broke. Within 2 weeks, Liam was formally charged with money laundering and wire fraud. The court sentenced him to 3 years in federal prison, a reduced term, due to a plea deal and first-time offense. He didn't fight it, didn't speak to me. Last I heard, he'd been transferred to a low-security facility in upstate New York. Chloe disappeared from the public eye. Her employer quietly let her go. She shut down all social media accounts and left the city. Word had it she moved back in with her parents in Connecticut. I never saw her again. Her name only came up once in an alumni newsletter someone forwarded me, a line that said she was no longer affiliated with the firm she once co-owned. Susan, once the centerpiece of every local charity luncheon and community event, retreated from everything. She stopped returning calls. When I visited the family home, she barely opened the door, eyes sunken and voice low. The fall from grace had broken something in her. I didn't feel angry anymore, just tired, a kind of ache that has no name. She kept one of Liam's old trophies on the mantel. I noticed it was dusty. Once she tried to say something to me, but her voice cracked and I just nodded and she closed the door. Henry's health had been declining for years, but it was a stroke just months later that took him. Aaron came with me to the funeral. There weren't many people there. No grand speeches or drawn-out rituals. Just a quiet burial under gray skies. I stood beside the casket, my hand on the wood, and whispered thank you. Not for everything, just for staying. I found an old photo of us in his office afterward. Me age 6 on his shoulders. I took it home. Later I found a short handwritten note behind it. It simply said, "You were always stronger than you knew." Aaron and I didn't rush anything. We spent more time together, took weekend trips upstate, slow drives along the Hudson. We never labeled what we were, we didn't need to. She brought light in pieces, not all at once. On some mornings we'd drink coffee and read separately, but our knees would touch beneath the table. That was enough. Sometimes we'd walk through Brooklyn Botanic Garden and I'd catch her smiling at small things, kids running through sprinklers, elderly couples holding hands, and I realized she was reminding me how to look at the world again. The lectures at NYU had grown into something bigger. I was invited to give a keynote at a National Ethics in Entrepreneurship conference. The organizers asked if I could bring someone with a complementary perspective, so I asked Erin to present a visual essay on identity and transformation. Her photos paired with my story brought an audience of 500 to silent stillness. Someone in the back row wept. Afterward, a woman approached and said, "You didn't just speak, you bled truth." After the conference, we received an invitation to design a workshop for young founders. We called it Start Honest, a program combining storytelling, ethics, and real-world case studies. It wasn't just about business, it was about choosing the kind of legacy you want to leave. A student once asked if failure defined a person. I told her only if you let it. Another student stayed after the session crying and said he'd just walked away from a corrupt business deal because of our story. Mason continued working with federal investigators. More than once he testified under oath about Liam's network of shell accounts and suspicious partnerships. His work made headlines, though he never sought credit. At dinner one evening he raised a glass to me and said, "To silence well earned, I laughed harder than I had in months. He handed me a worn envelope. Inside was the photo from our college dorm wall. We were both 20, blurry-eyed, full of plans. On the back he'd written, "Still here." Later that night he told me he'd been offered a position leading a financial integrity task force. He said he wanted to help others spot deception before it ruined lives. And then there was the quiet, the part no one sees. I'd lie awake some nights staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Not with anger, but with curiosity. I tried to trace where it all began. What moment did I miss? What sign did I ignore? But no matter how far back I reached, the conclusion was always the same. I didn't cause this, I survived it. One quiet Sunday, Aaron and I hosted a small round table at a co-working space in Brooklyn. As the session ended, someone asked me what justice looked like to me. I paused. Then I said I didn't burn anything down. I just let the truth do what fire always does. There was silence and then applause. Not thunderous, but full. Enough. As the room emptied, I stood by the window watching people return to their lives. Not everyone gets a clean ending. I didn't. But I got something better: clarity. And maybe a beginning that wasn't born from pain. I saw a kid on a skateboard stumble, get up, try again. There was something profound in that. In the distance, church bells rang. Erin slipped her hand into mine. So here I am. That's the story. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever stood in the ashes of what you thought was your future, I hope you find your truth too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And when you do, I hope it sets you free. If this story resonated with you, share it. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And remember, sometimes justice isn't loud, it's just true.